Hazel eyes have a reputation for shifting color depending on the light. Green in the morning, gold by afternoon, brown by night. It turns out that reputation is not a trick of the light, and not the only bizarre thing about Hazel. It is the leftover signature of two ancient populations whose DNA created something that does not behave like any other eye color, not even in the way it is inherited. For most of the last century, biology class taught a much simpler story. There was one gene involved, with two possible outcomes. Brown won out over blue, and that was supposedly the end of it. Hazel barely got mentioned. When it did come up, people waved it off as some kind of leftover blend, not a real color in its own right. That explanation turned out to be wrong, and the proof did not come from a classroom. It came from cracking open the DNA of the dead. Hazel shows up in roughly 1 out of every 20 people worldwide, with noticeably higher numbers in people of European and Middle Eastern descent. That uneven spread should have been the first clue. Something more complicated than a simple coin flip gene was going on. Here is the part the simple model could never explain. Hazel eyes do not carry one fixed amount of color. They carry a medium amount of a brown pigment called melanin, plus a small trace of a separate yellowish pigment. That combination is unstable in a very specific way. Depending on the light hitting it, the same eye can look green in one moment, gold in the next, and brown after that. It is not an illusion, and the eye itself is not changing shape. It is the visible result of a coloring system that never fully committed to one setting. So why would an eye carry two unfinished settings instead of one clear answer? It took ancient DNA to find out. The single gene idea goes back to the early 1900s. Early geneticists tried to map human traits using the same simple rules used for pea plants. One version of a gene beats another, plain and simple. Brown counted as the stronger version, and blue counted as the weaker one. With a basic chart, you could predict a child's eye color from the parent's eye color. That chart mostly works for brown and blue. It falls apart completely on Hazel. Two hazel-eyed parents can have children with green eyes, brown eyes, amber eyes, or hazel eyes, in combinations the old chart cannot explain. For 100 years, nobody had the tools to say why. In July 2025, geneticist Silvia Peretti led a team at the University of Ferrara in Italy. They published a study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Their goal was to rebuild the genetic history of European eye color from scratch. The team found that older methods for reading ancient DNA often gave unreliable answers whenever the genetic material was degraded or read only a few times. That describes most ancient bones ever recovered. So the team built a more careful method, one that accounts for that uncertainty instead of guessing past it. Then they pointed it at thousands of years of skeletons. What came back rewrote the timeline. Every Mesolithic hunter-gatherer skeleton tested so far carries the genetic marker for light eyes. All of them come from Western and Central Europe. 3 skeletons carry the exact same mutation. They come from 3 different countries: Lochbourg in Luxembourg, Labranda in Spain, and Villabruna in Italy. Villabruna is nearly 14,000 years old. Picture a dimmer switch wired to a light bulb. Researchers found a gene that works almost exactly like that. It's called HERC2. It sits right next to a second gene that actually produces the eye's pigment. When that dimmer switch gene gets flipped down, the pigment gene barely turns on, and the eye comes out blue. Geneticists now believe this mutation appeared exactly once in a single person. It happened sometime between 54,000 and 14,000 years ago, somewhere in Europe or the Near East. Every blue-eyed person alive today carries a trace of that one individual, inherited down an unbroken chain of births stretching back into the last ice age. So far, this is only the blue eye story. But the hunters were not the only population walking around Europe. A second group was about to arrive, carrying brown eyes instead of blue. Those two populations collided. What happened next was not a simple blend of the two. It created a brand new color, but that color turned out to be stranger than anyone expected. Hazel does not behave like any other eye color. But what does that actually mean? And how is that even possible? Around 8,000 years ago, farmers began arriving in Europe from Anatolia, in what is now Turkey. Scientists recovered a genome from a farmer buried near Stuttgart, Germany. It shows none of the dimmer switch mutation. Both of his copies of that gene are the original version. That version leaves the pigment gene turned up, which produces brown. So picture the map. Hunter-gatherer Europe was overwhelmingly light-eyed. Incoming farmer Europe was overwhelmingly dark-eyed. Two populations were about to share the same continent, each with a different setting on the same genetic dimmer switch. Then they did what neighboring populations have always done. They had children together. This is where Peretti's 2025 data gets interesting. The shift from dark eyes to light eyes across Europe was not a clean handoff. Her team found that pigmentation diversity stayed extreme for thousands of years after farmers arrived. It lasted well into the Bronze and Iron Ages. Light eyes, dark eyes, and everything in between kept turning up side by side across the same regions and time periods. Hunter-gatherer genes and farmer genes did not simply average out. They tangled. And tangled genes are exactly where Hazel comes from. A few smaller genes sit near the main dimmer switch. They add their own small adjustments on top, nudging the final color toward green or hazel instead of straight brown or straight blue. None of these smaller adjustments do much on their own. But layer them onto a population that is already mixing two different ancestral settings, and something new appears. It is a color that neither original population had on its own, an in-between shade, built from leftover instructions belonging to two completely different peoples. That is why hazel eyes are not simply brown eyes with some green mixed in. Genetically, they can be built from almost any combination of these small adjustments. That is also why hazel is the hardest eye color for modern DNA testing to predict. Forensic labs use genetic panels to guess a suspect's eye color from a crime scene sample. They will tell you the same thing. Brown and blue are easy calls, with accuracy rates well above 90%. Hazel and green are where the method starts to struggle, because too many small effect genes are pulling in too many directions at once. Two people can have what looks like the exact same hazel eyes and still carry almost none of the same gene variants to get there. Here's the part that actually only applies to hazel. At the main switch gene, most blue-eyed people carry two matching copies of the ancient hunter-gatherer version. Most brown-eyed people carry two matching copies of the original farmer version instead. Hazel-eyed people are disproportionately the ones who ended up with one copy of each. They are not simply descended from both ancient groups, the way virtually every European is. They are carrying both ancestral instructions side by side in the very same gene, still unresolved. A hazel-eyed parent can have one child born with solid brown eyes. Years later, a second child can come along whose eyes shift color in the light exactly like their own. For brown or blue eyes, geneticists can usually calculate the odds for each child with real confidence, because one gene does most of the work. For Hazel, that same calculation falls apart. The outcome depends on several smaller genes, and each one is inherited independently of the others.